So in terms of, I suppose to give you a bit of background myself, as Kieran says, I've been a dietitian now for over 20 years. And in that kind of role, I would have worked obviously in hospitals back in kind of when I first qualified, but I've been working more in kind of health promotion and private practice for 17 years. And in it, we would focus an awful lot on people's relationship with food, female health, and trying to kind of help people a lot nowadays even is understand nutrition and decipher the kind of fact from fiction, but also getting more comfortable with they eat and comfortable with their bodies as well. In terms of, why isn't this working now? One second. I don't know why it won't change the screen on me. That's really strange. Sorry now. Be really interesting with just one slide for the whole thing, wouldn't it? Next slide. I don't know. Hang on. Apologies, guys. Play slideshow. Okay, there we go. So with the information, in terms of when we talk about different nutrition, I will hear an awful lot talk about carbohydrates. Polycystic ovarian syndrome is something that and women are affected by PCOS, which is obviously quite common. And a lot of people are kind of alternative kind of nutrition comes in a lot to play here. And I think the difference is kind of knowing the difference between what alternative health is and complementary health. So sometimes alternative practice kind of push you away from some of the more factual stuff and the science-based stuff. Kind of nutrition can be a good thing. But most of us find we are now overloaded with information from lots of different sources, be it social media, influencers, or different kind of therapists. So it's trying to kind of get the balance of what is the right thing to kind of go for. Okay. Around it, but just to show you in terms of, on average, a woman's period can last up to 7 days, and the average is probably about 4 to 5. So we call it kind of cycle eating or food cycling, to kind of eat to complement your cycle. And what you find is in the first phase, we tend to need a little bit more carbohydrate, a little bit less fat, and we tend to have more energy. And then in the second phase, there's an increase in progesterone, which can cause more problems with constipation, wind, bloating, and difficulty, and just feeling not as good and more tired. And we can do, as we call this, cycle eating, which actually helps us manage that. When we look at the kind of the first phase of what we call the follicular phase, why we're able to have more carbs at this point is our insulin sensitivity is more heightened at this point. So we're actually able to utilize carbohydrates better in the first 2 weeks after you've had your period than you are in the second 2 weeks of your cycle. So our carb consumption should slightly alter throughout our cycle. So it's not talking about high carb, it's just saying we're able to utilize them better. So we tend to go in to get a few more calories from our carbohydrates and a little bit lower fat, and we kind of keep our protein level kind of in the middle. With the carbohydrates, what you're talking about is depending on where you are, depending on your activity level, for most women, it's about a fistful size of carbohydrate. Okay, so if you're thinking about how much rice or pasta or potatoes or sweet potato or any of those to have, it's usually a fist size. And the reason it's a fist is because the fist is the size of your own stomach. And your stomach can expand up to 4 times when you eat something. So for women, we only need about a fistful of carbohydrate at a mealtime, unless you're underweight or you're very, very active, or you're in your 20s, you might need a little bit more carbohydrate, but usually for most of us, it's about the fistful. So rather than even giving weights, it's kind of quite individual to what your own kind of palm size or your fist size is. And the key thing that was really, really important for women is iron. Iron is something that is ongoing problem in Irish women's diets from the ages of 14 right through until postmenopause. And I think possibly it comes a little bit from, there's been a move away from red meat consumption, which is a positive thing because we want people to be eating less red meat and more plant proteins. but people aren't replenishing their iron intakes. I don't want to pitch a particular brand of breakfast cereal, but one of the brands that is there in terms of iron is Weetabix is the breakfast cereal that is highest in iron and it's lowest in sugar. So that's why we like it even with kids when they're weaning, because it's a high iron food, or if you're having, like, from a point of view of a breakfast cereal, it's quite a good one to go for. If you are prone to low iron levels or you find you have a heavy cycle, obviously porridge is a really good breakfast to go for, but ready break is fortified with iron. And what I do actually at home in our own house is I buy Flavins and I buy ready break and I mix, or Odlums, any porridges, but I just add the ready break into it and I mix them together, because the consistency of ready break kind of brings us right back to your childhood and it's quite kind of a fine consistency. But if you mix it in with your jumbo oats, you don't really notice, but you're getting the iron in there. A good routine is to try and get something green in daily for your iron, but also for magnesium, which I'll talk about now in a second, which is a really kind of underrated mineral, but I think it's kind of getting its time now. People are kind of more aware of it. But if you do eat red meat 3 times a week, we tend to get enough iron. But if we're eating red meat maybe once or twice a week or less, you definitely want to try and get something green in every day, right? And a really good rule of thumb is the greener the vegetable, the more iron it contains. Food fortification in terms of a breakfast cereal can be useful, but you really want to make sure obviously it's a low sugar one. So obviously your oats will have no added sugar and Weetabix will be a particularly low sugar one. And beans and pulses will give us some too, you know, they'll complement it. But you really in that first phase do want to try and get some iron rich food in every single day. Because actually it's up to like, it's between 60–50% of women in Ireland are under par with their iron levels, which will just have a knock-on effect for tiredness, lethargy. Like it's not, you don't have to necessarily be deficient, but you can just be actually that you're kind of, you're just being a little bit under par.
Sorry, Aileen, can I just jump in for a sec?
Yeah.
I think there might be 1 or 2 people in the waiting room.
Oh, hang on, there is. Oh, and I have to let them in, do I?
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, hang on a second. Hang on, if I escape out of this. I think on view. Admit.
Thanks, Karen.
You know, I wouldn't mind. I actually saw that and didn't actually cop on the fact that I'm hosting now. Okay, everybody in? Okay. Okay, so apologies for those people who are in the waiting room there that I didn't let you in. Didn't mean to leave you out. So we're just talking about the food cycling and how to kind of eat in the different kind of timing of your period cycle. So the luteal phase, which is kind of the, what we call like the phase of, you know, when we tend to feel more hormonal. Okay, so normally the first 2 weeks of our cycle, we don't tend to have hormonal symptoms. The second 2 weeks of the cycle, when we can have poor libido, more tired, we can have gut problems as the progesterone level starts to increase. People are more prone to constipation, bloating, headaches, and all of those things can happen for some women for the full 2 weeks of that second half of the cycle, and for some it can be like for a few days or 2 days before they get their period. But it is something that happens, and it's all to do with the change in the hormone levels. And this is the point where diet really does start to play a factor in how we feel and how we can try and manage it. So we look at, this is just a disaster, and how this is not working for me. Sorry, that I don't know what is going on with the mouse don't work for me. Okay, so this is the one point where we don't want to overdo carbohydrates. So this is when our insulin sensitivity starts to reduce a little bit. So the first 2 weeks we have heightened gluten sensitivity, and the second 2 weeks we don't. And this is where you want probably kind of your carbohydrates to be a little bit less and that your fats to be a little bit higher. Okay, so with carbohydrates, again, we're not saying no carbohydrates. We never take carbohydrates out of the diet altogether, because that's kind of a knock-on effect, but that you would have, you know, you would be kind of more conscious of not overdoing them, and you're really going for your whole grain sources. Magnesium is probably the most important mineral at this point. So magnesium is the one where magnesium can help reduce cramping. It helps with tiredness. It can help with mood. And it's something that we now think that most of us aren't eating enough of. So in the past, we've kind of learned about, you know, iron, we've learned about zinc and vitamin D and kind of the minerals and nutrients that come into the fold, but magnesium is definitely one that's becoming more kind of recognized. They actually kind of nickname it nature's tranquilizer. But they actually say to work out how much you need as an individual, it's 2.5 milligrams per pound body weight. So for example, if you are, say you're 64 kilos, right, I would just literally multiply that by 64 kilos and multiply that by 2.2, that's 140 pounds. If I multiply that by 2.5, that means you need about 350 milligrams of magnesium a day. Okay, so it's 2.5 milligrams per pound body weight. And that's how much we know we need. And if you are prone to any of those symptoms, or you feel PMS is a little bit of an issue for you, definitely magnesium is something that can be really, really beneficial. If I ever meet a women who are struggling with digestive issues, constipation, mood, tiredness, cramps, any of those, we would often recommend a 250 milligram supplement of magnesium, and then talk about getting magnesium into the diet as well. Magnesium is kind of present it's in greens actually. The greener the vegetable, the more magnesium it contains. It's also in almonds. It's a really good source in almonds as well. And it's in dairy, it's in milk, it's in yogurts, it's in foods like that. But nuts can be really, really helpful in that kind of second half phase, because nuts, by their virtue of their type of food they're carbohydrate free, but they're full of natural fats. So nuts can be a really beneficial snack to have in that kind of second phase. Ironically, we actually need more calories in the second phase. And I mean, all of us, think of how many people have sugar cravings or cravings for something chocolatey or something nice in that second phase of your period. And that is actually, your body does need a little bit more calories. But if we can get those more calories in through things like, you know, nuts, seeds, or healthier sources, you'll find you won't crave the sugary stuff quite as much. But there is a reason why you crave more, is your body's actually looking for more. And that's when we kind of think about protein, of trying to really, and I'll talk about protein a little bit more later, but you want to make sure you're getting protein at every meal, because protein helps you feel fuller for longer. So, you know, this phase is really important that you are including some protein at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that there are some healthy fats included at breakfast. You know, you're going to feel hungry, you're not going to feel satisfied. Whereas actually, if you have your kind of proper kind of nutrients throughout the day, and you get the kind of balance throughout the day, you'll be able to get better nutrition, and hopefully try and help reduce any of the symptoms that happen in those kind of phases coming up to your period. Hope that makes sense to everybody so far. Any questions, obviously, of course, just add them in. The main thing is trying to, we don't need to fight. I mean, if you feel like something's sweet, that's okay. But what you really want to try and do is reduce kind of salty foods, because high salt intake will increase bloating. Okay, so that could be whether it's craving kind of, you know, salty crisps or a salty type of food, or adding saltier food. You really want to kind of try and counteract that. Now, the way to counteract things with saltiness as well is that you really want to increase your potassium intake. So basically in the body, potassium, if you kind of think of it, almost like pushes sodium out of the cell. So potassium is in your fruit and vegetables. So if you really work in getting like your 6 or 7 fruit and veg a day, having color at every meal, it means if you do have a little bit more salt, you're going to counteract the negative impact of too much sodium. Okay, so you want to reduce your salt intake, but the other side of it is making sure you've got plenty of color in there and plenty of fruit and vegetables. Alcohol is one thing, is we do recommend, and I don't know, I mean, I'm sure many of you will have experienced that, like, you'll find if you have a couple of drinks, it affects you far more when you're on your period than it does when you're not. And that is because you are more tired, okay? And you are cramping and you are all those things, but your tiredness level and alcohol will just make you a little bit more tired, and caffeine can have the same impact. So really what I say is not that you can't have a drink when you're kind of coming up to that phase, but I would really make, that's the time it's so important to make sure you match each glass of alcohol with a glass of water, to really try and counteract that impact that it might have on you, or make you feel kind of worse than you would if you normally had a couple of drinks. in terms of kind of getting good foods into the diet, it really is kind of pushing in like, you know, the fruit, the vegetables and nuts and foods like that, but also the omega-3. So inflammation in the body is kind of an interesting topic now. So we know that at certain points our body can go through inflammation and fighting infection, and it's an important kind of reaction that we have. But we know for some women they'll get slightly more inflammatory response during their period than others. And omega-3 is a really natural way of reducing inflammation in the body. So if you like oily fish, like salmon, trout, mackerel, kind of fresh tuna, sardines, foods like that, including oily fish in the diet twice a week can really help your omega-3, but I would definitely kind of concentrate on that a wee bit more in that second phase. Walnuts are the nuts that are highest in omega-3. So if you like them, they can be really, really beneficial. Even 6 walnut halves a day can be enough to get your weekly kind of omega-3 intake in. Or chia seeds, chia and linseed are also really, really good sources of omega-3. So with this, obviously for some people say it can last for 2 weeks this phase, for some people it can be only a few days, but for whatever it is, this is the one time when you kind of try and really up the goodness in the diet. And I think nuts are probably one of the best ways to kind of help balance out that you're getting the good fats in the diet. To talk about, I don't know if any of you will struggle with polycystic ovarian syndrome, or PCOS as it's called, but as it affects 10% of the female population who are in the reproductive phase. So it's actually really, really common. But to be honest with you, the advice for PCOS can be quite closely kind of aligned to even perimenopause and menopause. And it's really beneficial in terms of weight management as well. So there's no harm in kind of looking at it and how it impacts some people. Most of you are probably quite familiar with the concept of high GI versus low GI when it comes to foods. So high GI, or high glycemic index, basically means the less work your body needs to do to a food to break it down, the quicker the release of sugar. So foods that are more processed, like sugary foods or refined carbohydrates like white bread or rice or things like that, you'll find that your body doesn't have to work very hard to break it down. So you get a surge of blood sugars surge up, and then you get a corresponding lull. And for those who have PCOS, they are more insulin resistant than others. So they have to be careful that they don't drive their blood sugars up too high, because their body isn't able to produce insulin quite as effectively as those who don't have it. Low GI food is something like a low glycemic index, that is a more whole grain food, so the body has to work harder to break it down, which means you get a slower, steady release of sugar over a 3 to 4 hour period. So for example, whole grain rice or basmati rice would be a slower release energy food than long grain rice. By having the skin on your potato, you'll actually make the release of energy even slower. The porridge oats that we spoke about earlier on, even going for even a wholemeal or a brown bread, are just a slower release of energy than the white versions. So for anyone who has problems kind of regulating blood sugars or anything like that, this is kind of a very, very kind of important factor to look at. But the other thing is, for all of us, for general health, we're always much better off kind of basing our meals around the slow release carbohydrates. And then, as I said, keeping the portion size to about a fist size. I mean, I have in here how this is so important for regular meals, but likewise, it's really, really important for all women. So one thing that's quite relatively new in terms of what's coming out in research is that women should never exercise on an empty stomach. Okay, so apparently what happens is when we exercise on an empty stomach, our cortisol, our stress hormone levels rise a little bit, and as they rise, it can have a negative impact on our estrogen levels. So it seems to be okay for men to exercise on an empty, like first thing in the morning, say, on an empty stomach, but not for women. We should try and eat something beforehand, even if it's something small like a mandarin, or half a banana and have the rest after your training, anything like that. For anyone who exercises in the morning time, always have something before you go out to do your exercise. And the reason being is, for any of you who've ever lit a fire, you'll see that if you light a fire in the morning time, your metabolism keeps on working, you need to drip feed food throughout the day to keep that fire burning, okay? And our metabolism is exactly the same. So if you find that you skip breakfast, your blood sugars are going to be quite low all morning, and then you're kind of playing catch up for the day, and you're more likely to get cravings in the evening time. Or if you have a really good breakfast, but then you don't end up having lunch until 2 o'clock, and then you don't end up having dinner until 7, your energy levels just won't be as good, but your metabolism won't be working as efficiently. Whereby if you drop something in mid-morning, mid-afternoon, which could be a handful of nuts, a piece of fruit, a yogurt, something even quite small, you'll keep your metabolism working faster. So there's kind of a concept sometimes of, by skipping a meal or missing or leaving it a long time, I'll be burning off more calories. Whereas actually what we really want to do is get the body working more efficiently. So it's burning off more calories, not us not eating enough is burning off more calories. If that makes sense, I hope. In terms of inflammation, which I've touched on a little bit already, but it's very, very, I think it's something that we're now looking at it in terms of any type of insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, heart disease, anything to do with joint pain, anything like inflammation is definitely becoming more and more of a focus in terms of nutrition. And mainly because we noticed that previous dietary habits have resulted in the body having kind of being inflamed effectively, okay? So we were previously eating too much red meat, or when the Atkins diet became very popular and it was like eat as much red meat as you want, that just puts pressure on the body. Increased alcohol consumption can put pressure on the body and cause inflammation. A high sugar diet. Now, not any sugar. It's okay to have some sugar in our diet, but an excess sugar intake can result in inflammation in the body. And then sunflower oil, like omega-6, is an oil that can actually have a little bit of an increase, causing inflammation in the body. And what happened, even in the 1980s, 1990s, when we everyone started reducing their butter intake, they started having more sunflower oil, which kind of wasn't necessarily what we possibly should have done, but we just didn't know at the time. The anti-inflammatory foods are in terms of fats, the omega-3 we spoke about, so the chia seeds, walnuts, and the oily fish. Beans and pulses have natural kind of compounds in the fibers in them. And actually kind of one way of looking at it is the higher your fiber intake, the lower your sugar intake. So when you have your 5, 6, 7 servings of fruit and vegetables a day, if you're including your beans and pulses in your diet, you're getting nuts in the diet, what you're kind of doing there is you're just naturally bringing your fiber intake up, and the higher the fiber goes, we know the lower the sugar intake, and we know then that has a positive impact on reducing inflammation. So in kind of technically speaking, you can't really say those foods are anti-inflammatory, but we know that way of eating kind of stops us eating foods that are pro-inflammatory. So it's kind of more looking at how it helps balance out our diet. What we are all aiming for, and particularly women, is to try and include 30 kind of plant-based foods in your diet every week, that you want to have 30 in your diet every single week. And that's coming from fruit and vegetables, but including things like beans and pulses, which can be in a tinned form. They don't have to be whole and soaked and done that way. It can be adding a tin of chickpeas into a curry if you're making it, adding a tin of lentils into a soup. It could be a bought soup and you're adding it in to add the extra fiber in there. And it can just be kind of adding little bits in here and there to make your diet, I suppose, more flexitarian, if you want to think of it that, but getting more beans and pulses in there. If you don't like the texture of beans, which some people don't, and what I do with my kids is I actually mash them with the potato masher first of all before I add them into anything. So they don't really get the full texture of it, and I don't tell them it's there. And they don't know. But supplements are something that's kind of come up an awful lot in terms of what hormonally we should be taking, particularly then PCOS also. Vitamin D across the board, all of us should be taking vitamin D. We're living in Ireland because of COVID, but also vitamin D has now been shown to help with insulin control and insulin resistance. So we're learning more and more about that all the time. And hormonally, it seems to be a really positive thing to help to reduce hormonal symptoms in women. If anyone who has PCOS, if they are on metformin, which is a very common medication given for polycystic ovarian syndrome, you should be on vitamin B12. And often you're not told that when you're put on it. So B12 is imperative if you're on metformin. There's another supplement called inositol. And that's actually a natural hormone. They're part of B vitamins. They're a B vitamin family that are, most of us kind of produce or we have, but it seems to be people who have struggled with really bad PMS or with PCOS will tend to have lower levels, and it's a very natural supplement to take that can help. So the research around that is still quite emerging, and it's one of those things that some people are kind of, oh, well, I don't know if I can advise it or not yet, but so far the research is looking really, really promising, and I use it in clinic all the time, and people do find it beneficial. Magnesium, as I said, I think if you are prone to any type of cramping or tiredness or digestive altering around the time of your period, 100% I would recommend magnesium. It works really well. There's different types of magnesium. You can get magnesium oxide, you can get magnesium citrate. Magnesium citrate we use with people with really bad constipation, and it can really move things along. So if you don't have problems with that, do not take magnesium citrate. Take magnesium oxide. Magnesium oxide is cheaper, more readily available, and can be just as effective if you're having problems with cramps or anything like that. Zinc comes up an awful lot in terms of women's health, and we should be able to get enough of that from diet, okay? Zinc will be, you get in meat, we get in dairy, we get in nuts, we get in seeds, and if you have adequate protein in the diet, you should have adequate zinc in the diet. Omega-3 is always preferable also to get from diet, but if you don't like fish, you don't like seeds, and you don't like walnuts, well then a supplement may be beneficial. And then magnesium is one of those ones that it can be hard to get quite enough in the diet, but it'd be very much just for you if you feel it would be beneficial to you, okay? So that's just kind of they're the most kind of common supplements that we used in female health generally.
Aveen, just on the supplementation, if you don't mind me asking, with omega-3, if somebody doesn't like seafood, doesn't like fish, and you're encouraging them to get an omega-3 supplementation, how much per day, how many milligrams per day should I be looking at?
Never, you know what the thing is, never more than 1,000 milligrams a day. Okay, so on average, probably somewhere between 600 and 1,000 milligrams, and you want to make sure it's coming from EPA and DHA. So it's from a fish oil source. If they say, for example, someone doesn't mind taking a spoonful of chia seeds every day, then they could take an omega-3 supplement every second day, or like, you know, I have sometimes people who just take it at the weekends and don't take it on the weekdays because they like seeds during the week, or, you know, they kind of play around with it that way. But I would say somewhere between 600 and 1,000 milligrams would be the norm.
All right, good. The only reason I asked is I was on talking to somebody about this the other day with Allen and Barrett supplements. They actually tend to be quite low in what they're selling. So even if you're getting an omega-3 supplement, you got to make sure that you look at how much you're getting from it. Because
see what they do with those, a lot of those ones that are quite low is, and you read them, they tell you to take like 2-3 times a day, or you should take quite a lot. Whereas sometimes there's other brands you can get, right, where they look that they're more expensive at face value, but you only take one a day, and actually when you work it out, they're a better value. But yeah, there's like more EPA, there's the Nordic ones, there's a few different brands, but like they do on face value seem more expensive, but they're really good.
Thanks.
In terms of menopause, will happen to all of us, can't escape it. The key thing for women with perimenopause and menopause, and this is really depressing, okay, but once you hit the ripe old age of about 40 plus, we start to lose lean muscle mass at a faster rate, okay? So muscle mass becomes a big factor. We start to lose muscle mass. The next thing is that when we start to get a drop in estrogen levels, we start to lose our bone protective effect and our cardio protective effect. So the most important thing for any woman heading into menopause, or basically heading towards 40, or wherever you are in that window, is to really start minding your bones and your muscle. Okay, they're the two things you really want to mind. What can happen with women is sometimes they don't necessarily even put on weight, but their body shape can change. So it can be that because of the drop of estrogen, you lose that slightly more female shape and you tend to put more weight on around your middle. That's not an inevitability, can't speak, but it's something that it can be, if you get the diet right and you're exercising, you can minimize that happening. Okay, but it is one of those things of, it's a natural process the way the body goes, and it's just trying to manage around that. With the bones, okay, so for anybody, 90% of your bone health is decided by the age you're kind of 18, 19. So that's why kind of calcium is so important in the early years. And then as we get older, we need to have 3 servings of calcium a day kind of through adulthood. And then as we head towards menopause, we need to have up to 5 servings of calcium a day. So we definitely need to increase our calcium intake. And calcium, I mean, the most obvious source we tend to think of is dairy. Okay, if you don't want to go for cow's milk and you want to go for a plant alternative, I would always recommend soy milk, because it's got the same protein, and also it contains phytoestrogens, which can mimic the good activity of estrogen and can help reduce some of the symptoms of menopause, okay? Like things like hot flushes or kind of feeling uncomfortable, and it can also help with heart. Things like your oat milk, almond milk, and rice milk, I'm not a big fan of them, purely because they have no protein. This is the time in your life when you're trying to increase your protein. So if you go for those milks that people do because they're lower in calories, and they are fortified with calcium, but they don't have the protein. So if you're going to go for a milk, I would go with either your cow's milk or a soya milk in terms of getting the best for your body. And then protein, this is not a time to skimp on protein. It's when you want to make sure you are having protein at each meal. So in terms of that, like that would be using things like a Greek yogurt. So Greek yogurt, if you get a good one, it's like 10% protein. So like having that with your breakfast can be a really good way of, 100 grams, you get 10 grams of protein. That's a really good protein breakfast. At your other meals, you might have a bean or a pulse added into a soup or something along those lines. And then in the evening time, it could be a fish, a meat, tofu, tempeh, anything along those lines. But we're making sure we're getting protein evenly spread throughout the day. With protein, as I kind of taught, and I don't know if anyone who was at the last talk will remember this kind of slide, but what we know is, so we know that we get what we call maximum muscle protein synthesis at about 20 grams when we're in our 20s, about 30 grams when we're most of our adult life, and then it can go up to even 40 grams as we get towards 55. So 30 grams is kind of a good middle ground where you want to kind of optimize your protein. Now, a 30-gram breakfast of protein would be a really high protein, like, so that's not necessarily that practical, but at breakfast time, if you can get 10 to 15 grams of protein at breakfast, that's really what you're aiming for. And that would be like making your porridge on milk. It would be using Greek yogurt as a base, as your protein base. It would be having 2 eggs. It would be, kind of incorporating that we definitely are getting protein there every morning, not making porridge on water to save calories, because then we're losing out in the protein. We want to prioritize protein there. At lunchtime, it could be having like about 100 grams of chicken or fish or something along those lines, a couple of eggs. It could be tofu, tempeh, a bean, a pulse, anything along those lines, and then doing the same again in the evening time. When we're kind of getting into kind of more menopause, you do want to think about having protein as one of your snacks, which could be, if you're out, it could be a milky coffee. It could be like a loaf of latte or something. It could be having a yogurt. It could be having a handful of nuts, and the nuts are really, really beneficial at that point too, definitely for in terms of female health. So with protein, it's really important to try and get that kind of optimal spread throughout the day as much as possible. In terms of health changes, it comes really back to heart health. And it's not that you're at an increased risk of heart disease and post-menopause, it just means now the same risk factor as men. Okay, estrogen protects us until that point, and then we just have the same risk factor, and because of a slight change in body shape and getting kind of maybe a little more weight around the middle. So it comes down to the same thing again of what we've spoken about in terms of just even the food cycling eating, and in terms of PCOS, it's really looking at omega-3, it's all the plant proteins, and it's kind of looking at things like your porridge oats, your high fiber cereals, but it's really prioritizing fiber. Fiber is really important because fiber, what it does is cholesterol can cling to the fiber, and then we can excrete it from the body. So it's really trying to work on that. So make sure, I think somebody might not be on silent.
Yeah, that would be Jennifer. If you want to just tap her mic there, you have to mute her.
I can try, and I have to go out of this here. Hang on a second. Here, I'll mute her there. There she is. She's muted.
She's getting in trouble.
I'm in trouble now. She gets a black card.
Yeah,
Not black card, a red card. What are we talking about? So hang on a second now. It keeps on going into that funny place. Okay. In terms of hot flushes, like there's no, I mean, unfortunately, there is no magic solution to this. But what I will say for anyone who has kind of time to practice or anything like that, increasing our intake of phytoestrogens in the diet from the age of 20 onwards, whenever you start, can help reduce symptoms of flushes in women, okay? So phytoestrogens are plant-based compounds that mimic the good activity of estrogen. So they're not estrogen, they don't feed anything estrogen-wise, but they do mimic the good activity. And really good sources are things like edamame beans, soya beans, it could be a soya milk or a soya yogurt, like a product like that, tofu, tempeh, linseed and flaxseed, any of those. So even having a spoonful of linseed every day in your cereal can be a really good thing just to help reduce the risk of flushes. The main thing then is to try and look at like reducing caffeine, definitely reducing alcohol if you're finding it difficult, and plenty of water. It's a natural response that the body has from the drop of estrogen, and sometimes people get like they might get, you know, hormone replacement therapies and things like that, and unfortunately they do work, but you're kind of delaying the inevitable, like when you have to come off that at some point too. But I would say is trying to introduce some soya-based products into the diet on and off, kind of from an early age. And then if you feel you're in perimenopause or menopause, then I definitely would be looking at introducing them there. The edamame beans and soya beans are really, really useful. Like they're really, really good in phytoestrogens. They can be really helpful as well. But there isn't, unfortunately, a magic pill that can just make it all go away. Some of it comes down to being basic, the basic kind of concept of eating, which is, you know, looking at our bodies. So sometimes we have all these symptoms and we're tired or we're moody, we're all these different things. We're not getting out, we're not getting exercise. We know like exercise reduces, regular exercise, I should say, reduces PMS symptoms by 25%. You know, adequate water helps digestion work well. It helps regulate hot flushes or things like that. Eating at regular intervals. I mean, our brain feeds off glucose and it needs a glucose supply every 3 to 4 hours. So by eating at regular intervals, we help with concentration and get rid of cloudy brain or anything like that. And then obviously trying to get adequate sleep as well. And if you have any problems with sleep in terms of hormonal health or feeling like, you know, that it's hard to fall asleep or feeling very hot at night, it is trying to kind of think about relaxation before bed, no caffeine and no blue screens before bed as much as possible. It can be just beneficial just to have a lighter sheet to sleep on, and if your partner needs a quilt, leave them off and you just have your light sheet while you have it. Because women do get hot flushes during their periods as well. So we do, like, you know, women definitely will find they get very, very hot during the night, and it's no harm having a separate sheet and just saying, off you go, good luck, leave me alone. In terms of your dinner plate, there are 2 examples here of the prime healthy dinner plates, okay? And
sorry for cutting across it. Your screen share isn't there if you're on a slide.
Am I? Okay.
That was when you went into unmute or to mute earlier on.
Hang on a second. It says I am sharing a screen.
Oh, maybe that's my fault. Oh, okay.
Can anybody else see it? You can? Okay.
Yeah, no, it is. That was me. Sorry.
That's all right. I was losing my mind. So in terms of the kind of different type of plates, for most women, it really is, it's kind of the half a plate of vegetables or salad, or color a quarter plate of carbohydrate or quarter plate of protein. Or, as I said earlier on, if you think of your fist, it's like a fistful of carbohydrate, a fistful of protein, and 2 of your vegetables. If you're trying to kind of, you know, you're very active and you don't want to lose any weight and you want to maintain activity levels, you would just make the plate look like it's divided into 3. But for most of us, the third is more for men, and the half vegetables, quarter is more for women, because unfortunately we do need less calories than boys. Okay, so I'm gonna go, I don't know, is there any chat coming through to see any questions and see if I have covered everything that you guys. Oh, are you the host again? Jeepers, this is like.
No, I'm not.
This is like one of those like comedy things. Okay, hang on a second. I just want to see the chat. Okay.
I don't see any questions from anyone yet.
Okay. You can turn your cameras on if you wanted. I feel like I'm just talking to a black screen. Is there any questions at all? Or anything I didn't cover? I'm going to make you the host again, actually. You go back to being the host, Kieran.
Yeah.
Well, we allow Jennifer to be unmuted.
You want me? Yeah. You want me to unmute them? We reclaim the host. There we go. Okay.
Okay, there's 3 chats there. Hang on a second. Where are they now? Can you see the chat there?
Yeah. So I'll read the question out to Aveen. Is there any foods that should be avoided when on your period that would help cramping?
So if you think of, so there's nothing necessarily that will cause the cramping, but there are things that can help reduce the symptoms of the cramping. So that would be magnesium. Magnesium would be the real thing that can help there. So it would be in terms of food, that could be almonds would be probably the highest in magnesium or dairy. And if you get bad cramps with your period, like if you get cramps where you feel like you need to take a painkiller, magnesium can almost be just as effective, but a more natural way of doing it. But there's nothing that you're eating that will make it worse. Now, what can make people more windy can be onions and garlic, and that can be quite a common issue around the time of your period where you might feel a bit more windy. You're really loving this conversation, Kieran. And then a fistful of carbs with each meal is perfect, yeah. A fistful of carbs each meal would be ideal. Yeah.
I'm going to chime in with a question. Well, not a question, just a kind of point. You were talking earlier on about speeding up the metabolism by eating at regular intervals.
Yeah.
A lot of women don't eat breakfast, and then they hear about intermittent fasting, and then they think, oh, well, this suits me because I don't eat breakfast. It's actually, and I know you'd be a proponent of this, in that you recommend, if you're doing intermittent fasting, to actually start the fast at the evening meal at 7 p.m. So then that way you're actually having breakfast. So I just thought maybe that was a point for some people, because I am aware of some clients that don't eat breakfast.
Yeah, so
it ties into that.
It's all to do with our circadian rhythm. Our circadian rhythm is how our hormones reflect the daylight and nighttime hours, okay? So we know that we naturally apparently start to wake at about 7:30 in the morning. We're at our peak mental performance until about, kind of about 11, 12 o'clock. Then we're at our peak physical performance in the afternoon. And then in the evening times, our body starts to reduce cortisol levels and increase melatonin to help you sleep. And then we rest, we have a deep sleep. And then before we rise, melatonin reduces and cortisol increases. So there's a natural cycle our body follows with hormones. And what happens is the intermittent fasting can be really, really effective. Okay, it can be really effective in terms of anti-inflammatory diets and helping weight management. But like we say, what we're finding is people going, okay, I'll wait to eat until 12, 1 o'clock, and then I'll eat until 8 or 9 o'clock. And then they say they're intermittent fasting, but they're not. They're just skipping breakfast. It's a different thing. So that's where it is. So basically our cortisol levels start to rise. And if we say exercise, go out about normal activity levels, and we haven't fueled our body, those cortisol levels will continue to rise, which is the stress hormone. And then that has a knock-on negative effect. So we know that people who effectively skip breakfast, and skipping breakfast would be like not kind of leaving a longer than an hour gap after you get up. Those who skip breakfast are 4.5 times more likely to gain weight in the future. And it's because they will tend to overcompensate or, make poorer food choices later on in the evening time, because their blood sugars are low. So yeah, it's one of those things that when I do use intermittent fasting with some clients, we would always have like that they they start like the latest, they might start eating at 9 o'clock in the morning and then kind of finish early. Yeah. IBS all the time, should vegetarian eat select. So anyone with IBS, you'll find there are some probiotics that are really, really effective with IBS. And it would be Alflorex is one, which is ALFLOREX. It's about €30 for a month. Like, it's not a cheap probiotic, but it can be really, really effective for relieving IBS symptoms. With what someone's following a more plant-based diet and they get IBS symptoms, one thing I'll say is trying to make sure one of your meals is a non-fiber source of protein. So sometimes their protein during the day is all beans and pulses and chickpeas, and they're eating those all the time. So to make sure that, say if they're having lentils at lunchtime, that it's like tofu, tempeh, or corn, or seitan or something like that in the evening time, but they're not having beans and pulses at 2 meals a day. So sometimes it's actually about balancing the fiber in the diet. So I would definitely try the probiotic first of all, which is the Alflorex. And the second thing would be just making sure that the diet's not too high in fiber, because I see a huge amount actually of people following either vegetarian or vegan diets with IBS, and it's simply just too much fiber. Hope that helps. Any other questions?
Very shy today, Aveen.
What's the best way to curb craving? Because I always find, like, the week before I start my period, I just want carbs. Like, I just don't want anything else. Like, I really don't. So I don't know how to satisfy my appetite or my cravings enough to not want them as much. So is it just fill up on protein?
Well, I would say is make sure you let yourself have carbs. Don't try and restrict them. In that, make sure you let yourself have them. So I would say, yeah, I would up your protein. So I'd make sure your protein kind of portions are even a little bit bigger at your meal times. Okay. I'd also, fats can help curb cravings. So, nuts, if you like. Do you like nuts?
I love them.
Yeah, because nuts could be
I'm always nervous of eating them though, because I know that they're good fat. I do know, but I'm always nervous of eating them because I probably will eat too many and then I'll be like, oh, I actually feel guilty now.
Yeah, so if you feel like that, I would do is like, the best thing to do is like literally get like a ramekin dish or something to put like a handful into.
Okay.
And like take it to your desk if you're working, or just kind of don't sit beside a bag of nuts, because nobody has any self-control to do that. Like, just take a portion away and just take a good handful.
Okay.
So that's one way. And nuts would be really, really good in helping it, particularly the week beforehand, because they've got the magnesium, they don't have any carbohydrate, they've got the protein and the fats. Yeah. So they help kind of with the cravings that way. The other thing would be is maybe taking a magnesium supplement.
Yeah,
that can help. Okay.
From listening to you today.
Yeah, that can definitely help with the cravings as well. Plenty of water. But at the same time, remember, you are able to we do need slightly more calories just the week beforehand. So it is okay to have to let yourself have something sweet, or crave something to let yourself have something, the week beforehand. Yeah. But almost try and get the balance better during the day to see if you crave it quite as much.
Okay.
Yeah. Protein. So protein powder can be. Someone's asked me to recommend the use of protein powder, and it can be really helpful to complement a diet. So if you're struggling, particularly if you aren't much of a meat eater, protein powder can be really beneficial. So it can be good to add into a soup, or if you're making a chickpea curry and you don't want to add tofu, you don't like tofu, or you don't want to have chicken in it, you could add into it, and it can be quite beneficial. So I would say what protein powder is, it can complement your diet, and it can be useful to have, but I wouldn't want to rely on it, if that makes sense. So I don't have any problem with protein powders at all, just they can be handy to have as a backup.
When you're talking about adding protein into meals that you're cooking, obviously you're not talking about vanilla flavored or chocolate flavored or cheese.
No, I'd be talking about just like a pea protein powder or whey, just plain whey.
Perfect.
Yeah, I actually tend to recommend sometimes just skim milk powder. It's much cheaper, and it's whey. So you can buy skim milk powder in the supermarket, and like a tablespoon will give you 11 grams of protein.
That's very smart. Yeah.
Yeah. So it can be kind of just a compliment. Yeah. Like that's how they make protein milks and stuff. They just add in the extra whey. So I think of anything I didn't go talk about. Actually, one thing about the cravings as well is vitamin B6. It can help reduce cravings in some people, not in all, but the research is kind of a bit mixed around it. But a really good source of vitamin B6 are, it's actually random foods, peanuts, bananas, and turkey. It's like really random. But even a banana, like bananas are great actually in the week coming up to your period because they've got magnesium and vitamin B6.
And they're quite filling as well.
Yeah. They kind of, they give you that kind of sense. And if you mash it, for example, or even like, and add a bit of cinnamon in with it, it tastes sweeter.
Okay.
And it kind of makes you feel like you're having something nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do to my poor children until they realize what I'm doing to them. It's like I mash up even strawberries and mix it with some cream cheese and put it on rice cake to tell them it's cheesecake.
That's a really good idea.
So far it's working. I'll get clued in at some point.
Just in reference to calories, everybody is obsessed with calorie restrictions. So how can that affect on, well, we know how it can affect on women's menstrual cycle, can stop it. So would you mind just talking briefly about calorie restrictions and the impact that has?
Yeah, well, so what, like, to give you to really emphasize how this has become a bigger issue, like when I was in college, we did not learn about what's called functional, hypothalamic functional amenorrhea, right? We did not learn about it in college. It wasn't something that was on our radar at all. And now we would probably in clinic see one person a week coming in who has lost their period because of under eating and over exercising. So there's a thing called the athlete triad, where basically it is that in order for a woman to have enough body fat to produce estrogen and to have her hormone, you need to have a healthy weight coupled with an adequate food intake, coupled with kind of getting the balance of exercise. The three things have to come together. If you're underweight, you can't, sometimes people go, I'll just eat more calories, I'll eat more calories. If you're underweight and you're not getting your period, eating more calories to keep the exercise the same will not work. You have to reduce the exercise. So when women come into us, and we now have girls coming in from ages of 14, 15 onwards, who are taking up running or a lot of cardio, and they've lost their period, we will say that we stop all cardio until they get their periods back. So if you miss 3 periods in a row, you are already at high risk of osteopenia. Okay, and that's the early stages of bone issues and bone kind of disease. If osteopenia is reversible. So if we get it in time and get the body back producing estrogen, you'll get your hormone health back and your bone health will come back. But if it goes on for a long period of time, you end up with osteoporosis, which is not reversible. So with women, so in terms of calorie requirements, and I hear people they all have different calories that they kind of tell me that they think they need. So for example, a teenage girl, up until the age of about 20, a girl needs 2,400 calories a day. Then from about 20 to about 40, a woman needs about somewhere between 2,000 and 2,200 a day. And then from 40 onwards, obviously when life just starts getting really good, you need about 1,800 a day, okay? And I don't think I've ever put somebody on less than 1,800 calories a day in a diet.
Women flip out when you tell them to eat 1,800.
I know.
And but again, that's just what's happened over 10, well, no, longer than that, since the 80s. Yeah. But they have to, but people, lads as well, I see it with some else as well.
Well, guys tend to get more into the macros and stuff, or like the grams of macros, and macros are kind of be big enough with women too. But calorie wise, if you think about it, so if your body's like if you have lie in a darkened room for 24 hours and did not move, did not do anything, right? You have no stimulation, no lights on, nothing. Most of us here, our bodies will use between 1,300 and 1,500 calories just to keep us alive. Okay, so what has happened with calories is, people are too black and white thinking about it. They look at a food and think I have to exercise that off. They completely forget about the fact that our bodies are using probably about, like, I'm 45, so my BMR will be somewhere about using probably about 1,400 calories a day. And then obviously because of like activity level, I do eat probably about 2,000 calories a day, right? So that would be kind of, you know, a normal amount to have for a woman of my age. And people don't believe that. People think that it should be 1,600, or I hear people doing 1,300 calorie diets or constantly pulling back. But what happens is, if you just pull back on calories, your body prioritizes. So first thing is you'll lose muscle mass and you'll lose bone mass. And you'll lose mainly you'll find you get more sluggish digestion, because like your bowel is a muscle. So it'll prioritize what needs to function, and it'll unprioritize things that kind of don't need to work quite as efficiently. So the difference between, say, like, I'm lucky probably because of the profession I do, I've never dieted, I've never restricted calories, which is why I can eat that amount of calories and maintain a healthy weight. Whereas there's other women who may be my age who've dieted a lot over the time, and they find they're eating much less than that, and they're afraid to eat more because they'll put on weight. So I would get people come into me who are eating maybe 1,200, 1,400 calories a day. They want to lose weight, and when I increase their calorie intake, they lose weight. But it takes a lot of convincing.
Yeah.
And it's about manipulation. It's about the timing of the protein. It's about the fiber. I don't want to bore you all, but there was one study I did. I did a big research project for Board BIA about 9 years ago, and we compared diets in the UK, Sweden, and in Japan. The Japanese were the leanest, and those in the UK were the most overweight. But the Japanese ate an average of 2,700 calories a day, whereas those in the UK had a reported 1,600 calorie a day intake. So we had to compare and go, how is this working? And when we looked at the diets, the Japanese had the highest fiber intake, and they had absolutely, it was like clockwork, they had 30 grams of protein each meal. They had really high fiber, they exercised every day, and they just had a better balance of nutrition. When we actually looked at their breakdown, it was like 50% carbohydrate, 30% fat, 20% protein. Like, it was textbook perfect. So a lot of it is about, it's not about calories. It's about, like, we don't count calories. I do not count calories in clinic. Even when I work with anorexic patients, anything, we do not count calories. We just look at food groups. I think
sorry.
Yeah.
I think that the calorie restriction has then in turn led to people obsessing over, what can I snack on? What can I snack on? What can I snack on? Because they're not having enough at meal times.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
or fats. People are taking fats out of the diet because they're restricting calories. So then the meal ends up being like, you know, it's a stir fry with no fat. Like, it could be a chicken stir fry with rice. There's no fats in there. So therefore, in a couple of hours' time, you're going to feel hungry. Whereas if you had added, a spoonful of sesame oil or olive oil or whatever when you're cooking it, first of all, you're going to absorb all the fat soluble vitamins in it. And second of all, you're going to feel fuller for longer. And your digestion will work better. Quite often constipation, even, we're talking about that like in terms of second phase of the period, a low fat diet can cause constipation as much as not enough fiber. But it's trying to get that back. It's trying to get people to realize that, like, thinking back on, we've done the whole low fat thing and realized that doesn't work. We did the whole high protein thing and realized that didn't work. We've done the sugar is toxic and realized actually that's not quite true. We've done now that all meat is bad. We're going, well, actually some meat's okay. And hopefully we're coming back to the fact that nothing is necessary. There's no such thing as a good or bad food. It's just a good or bad diet. It's like trying to get that balance in there as much as possible. But my job 20 years ago, our job, what we were taught, was to dictate and tell people what to do. And now my job is reassuring people about food and going, it's okay. And I really like the questions of red wine as an antioxidant. So red wine is, yes, it contains polyphenols, which are really, really good for us and can help work as an antioxidant. But unfortunately, the amount of red wine you have to drink to get the benefit might give you liver failure. So it doesn't work that well. But grapes themselves are really, really high in polyphenols. So grapes are really, really good. But when it comes to wine, red wine's not healthier than white wine. They're both fine in moderation. Yeah, not too much.
I can feel the tears coming.
I spoke to my receptionist this morning. She's working remotely at the moment, and I said to her, "How was your weekend?" She went, "Oh, fine. Just walked and drank." I was like, "Yeah, that probably sounds about right at the moment."
It's better than my weekend.
Yeah, so it's like, it sounds familiar. Yeah. Is there any other questions?
I think that's it.
If people have questions, though, like if they do think of something after this, even just let Kieran know and he can email me through and ask me.
Yeah, you want to, what's it, aveen@dnc.ie?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll type it up here so people will
have it.
And or if you want to go to me, you can go to me and I'll pass it on to Aveen anyway. So that's fine. But yeah, thanks, William, Aveen. That was absolutely fantastic.
Well, hopefully it was interesting. Didn't blame you.
Great, thanks a million.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was great.